This video will be about the Industrial Revolution, and we're going to identify the three things needed for industry to grow and why industry grew up with cities. And we'll also identify some important inventions and their impact on the United States. So make sure and take good notes. There are a fair amount of notes in this presentation, so as usual, hit pause whenever you need to, rewind, and see me for any clarification. So to start off, the Industrial Revolution that took place mainly in the 1800s, I'm going to give you some basic facts, and you're going to want to jot these down. Before the Industrial Revolution, about 90% of people made a living through agriculture. In other words, they were farmers. They worked off the land. And after the Industrial Revolution, people are going to be working in factories on machines. As machines began to be invented and built, products were made in factories instead of homes. Before the Industrial Revolution, most products, most goods, everything from horseshoes to shirts and shoes, were made in the home by individual families. After the Industrial Revolution, these products are going to be made in factories and sold to consumers. Okay, an ample and abundant supply of labor encouraged the growth of industry, especially in cities. One of the key components of industry that's required is labor. You need people to work in the factories. And because cities were becoming so populated, there were plenty of people there to work in the factories, and that encouraged the growth of industry. And also, there was a product that became very important during the Industrial Revolution. We take it for granted, but that product is the clock. Before the Industrial Revolution, people really didn't need to know what time it was. It really didn't matter. When you're a farmer, you need to know that it's time to go to work when the sun comes up, and you know it's time to go to bed when the sun goes down. And it doesn't matter if it's 1:30 or 1:45, but with the growth of railroads and people needing to know train schedules and also when they need to be at work, if you need to be at work at 1:30 or 1:45, that makes a difference. So people started watching the clock, and this is new to the United States. So why were cities the sites of early industrial development? In other words, why did factories crop up in the cities? Well, first, the cities were where production resources were, and that basically means natural resources, and that could be everything from coal to iron. In the cities, there was the favorable location that comes with a city. In other words, cities are usually located on the water for transportation. They are usually located in a flat area of land. You don't see too many cities, especially 200 years ago, built into the side of a mountain. So cities had a favorable location. Climate cities were built where the climate was certainly reasonable. This is why you didn't have very large cities until later on in our history that are built in very, very cold areas. That's not going to come until later. Closeness to water, this would be for power and transportation. And of course, transportation. Cities are usually close to railroads, again, being on the river, so steamships can transport goods and people, and this is why industry grew up near the cities. And of course, we discussed an available labor force. Because the cities are so populated, there are plenty of people that can work in the factories. And this is another reason why industry grew in the cities. And an available marketplace. This is because there were people in the cities to buy goods from the factories. And all of these are reasons why cities were sites of early industrial development. Sam Slater was an Englishman. He was from Great Britain, and he was the man who brought the factory system to the United States from England, where the Industrial Revolution began. Samuel Slater worked and lived in England, and he observed how factories worked in Great Britain, how they were set up, and the processes used to create a functioning factory. And he wrote down all that information, and then he stole it and brought it to the United States. He was basically an industrial spy. And he brought this information to the United States and he disseminated it, and people learned how to recreate the industry that was so successful in Great Britain, except they were doing it here in the United States. Okay, there are three things needed for industry or for factories and machinery to grow. The first thing is resources, natural resources to build, transportation systems, energy source, land to build on. The second is a labor force, and these are the people to work in the factories. And then you need something called capital. And this isn't the kind of capital like the Washington, D.C. is the capital of the United States. That's spelled with an O. This is capital spelled with an A. And that is just simply money to start the business. And you must have these three things for industry to grow. So let's take a look at some inventions that came about during the Industrial Revolution. And I'm not going to go into super detail in this presentation. You'll be looking at some of these inventions at another station. The most dramatic change to take place during the Industrial Revolution was in the textile industry. Textiles are clothing and cloth products. This is a photograph of an old factory, and these are all fibers. These are probably cotton fibers, all being used to make some type of cloth, either for clothing or for blankets or for jackets or anything having to do with fabric, the textile industry. And this was the industry that went through the most dramatic change during the Industrial Revolution. Okay, Eli Whitney was the inventor of the cotton gin, which contributed to the expansion of slavery in the South. The cotton gin looked like this, and we'll talk much more about the cotton gin as we get closer to the units on the Civil War. Jethro Tull in 1701, which is 100 years technically before the Industrial Revolution started. This is called the seed drill. And this was a machine that aided in the planting of seeds. James Hargreaves created the spinning jenny, again used in the textile industry. John Kay, the flying shuttle. This was also used in the textile industry. James Watt invented the steam engine, and we know how vital this was to the transportation revolution, and it's going to become very important in factories and during the Industrial Revolution. Robert Fulton invented the steamboat, the Clermont, the very first steamship that could travel against the current or against the wind. And we know how important that was in transporting goods and people. George Stephenson, the rocket. This was also a basic kind of railroad system which used the steam engine. Cyrus McCormick of the Spice Company invented the reaper, which was a machine that could collect crops. Very important. Let's go back to that for just a second. Important to remember that before these machines were invented to basically harvest all these crops, people had to do it by hand. They had to go up, pick up the corn or wheat or whatever else they were harvesting, put it into a bag and walk it back to the barn or wherever they were storing it. So this invention is going to cut down on time substantially, and it's going to make the farm owners wealthy. Okay, Samuel Morse invents the telegraph along with Morse code. And of course, now maybe we're getting to some names that are familiar to you. Alexander Graham Bell invented in 1876 the telephone. And we'll talk more about this as we get a little bit further in the year. So what might be some effects of industrialization? You're going to want to think about what's going on in the cities, basically, size of the cities, living conditions, working conditions, and new social classes. One effect of the Industrial Revolution is the size of cities. Factories grow, job seekers come to the cities, and they make the cities more crowded because that's where they can get jobs. Urban areas are growing exponentially. In other words, cities are getting bigger quickly. Factories crop up near energy sources. This would be mainly on rivers or quick flowing streams where they can use the power of water to power their factories. And some cities specialize in certain industries. Can you think of any cities that specialize in a certain industry? The one I'm thinking of is Detroit. Do you know what Detroit specializes in? They make cars, and the entire city is basically built around that industry. Living conditions in the cities. There weren't any sanitary or building codes. There were no laws protecting people in the buildings and in the factories. There was a lack of housing, education, and police protection. Crime ran rampant. Lack of running water and plumbing. Epidemics in the slums. The slums are the poorest parts of the city. Very difficult place to live at this time in the mid 1800s in a city if you didn't have the money to provide for yourself. The working conditions in the factories created plenty of new jobs. That was wonderful. But it set up a competition. What's more efficient? What's better for the factory owner? Human workers or machines? The factories were frequently dirty and unclean, unsanitary. There were dangerous machines in unsafe conditions for long hours. There were people that got sucked into machines and they died. And this was not a rare occurrence. It was very dangerous to work in factories in the 1800s. And there was harsh and severe discipline. If you didn't do your job, you could get beaten at work. And there were no laws protecting you against that. And the rise of a new social class, the middle class, factory owners, merchants, shippers. There were the poor, who are same as the poor are today, and there were the extremely wealthy. And that was before the Industrial Revolution. But afterwards, there was this middle class that kind of came up. And the upper class, the super rich, were jealous of the rising middle class. They felt threatened. And then there was the lower middle class of factory overseers and skilled workers. And frequently, some of the workers, many of the workers that did not have skills or weren't educated were overworked and underpaid. So you guys got a lot of information about the Industrial Revolution and the growth of cities and the growth of factories. Please feel free to watch this video as many times as you need to. Pause wherever you need to. Slow it down if you need to. And most importantly, if you have any questions, you want clarification, or you would like to learn more about any of the specifics discussed in this video, shoot me an email, talk to me in homeroom, talk to me in class, and I will do my very best to clarify for you. Have a nice day.